So at Unsplash, we recently set up testing for our TypeScript types. And the way this works is using a TSLint rule that is provided as part of dtslint. dtslint is the tool for linting definitely typed. So if you're familiar with writing tests in definitely typed, the tool allows you to have comments that look like this. So you can say expect type. You can also say expect error. And then when you run dtslint, it will tell you whether or not your expectations pass. But we want to do the same thing outside of definitely typed in our own project. So how can we do that? dtslint is a command line interface, and it does quite a lot of things. It doesn't just do that. But we're only interested in using the TSLint lint rule. So we can actually see here that the rule we're interested in is called expect, and is its own standalone TSLint rule. We have requested that they publish this independently so that we can more easily use it. But in the interim, I wanted to explore how we could use it. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate. There are a few caveats. So if you want to get this set up, then hopefully this will be useful. Okay, so we've already seen this is what the syntax looks like for writing your tests. So let's start with an example, and then I'll get into some of the things you might want to think about. Let's create a tsconfig, and let's give it some compiler options. We don't need any, let's just make it strict. Okay, we'll include, in fact, let's just include all files for now. That's what it does by default. So let's create a main file. So for example, let's say we have a add function that takes two numbers and it returns a number. And we want to write a test to make sure that if you try to pass a string in, it should give you an error. And that the result of this function is going to be a number. And I think that's right, yep. So we haven't actually set up dtslint yet, so that's what we're going to do next. And we probably want to have our test in a separate module. So this is our source file, and then we'll have another file for our tests. And we need to import the main file. There we go. So the next thing is to install dtslint. So that's what we'll do. Yarn add dtslint. Okay, so like I said earlier, dtslint is actually its own CLI, but we're not interested in using that because that does quite a lot of things, and we only want to use the expect TSLint rule that it provides. So we're going to install TSLint ourselves, and we are going to create a TSLint file which is going to have some rules, and the rule is called expect. And I think it's the rules directory is going to be from dtslint. I'm not sure I remember where inside. There we go, bin rules. So now we should be able to run TSLint against our project. So that's just our main tsconfig in the root directory. And we want to run, we want to lint all files inside the type test directory. Let's see what happens if we set this up correctly. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, so we're not getting any errors. And what happens if we change this? Fantastic. Okay, so the lint rule is behaving as we'd expect it to. It's checking that our comments have the correct expectations. This one doesn't because it actually returns a number and we're saying string, so we get an error. So this is enough. This is testing our types. But there are a few things to think about. Let's just save what we have so far. So we have a package, source directory, tsconfig, TSLint, and our tests. We don't want to commit the yarn lock. Let's just ignore that. Actually, let's commit the yarn lock. So something you might run into eventually is an issue with the TypeScript version. Normally you have a version installed locally inside your folder, but dtslint installs its own version, which you can see from here. It's installing next, so it's not the stable version, it's the next version. I think the reason they do that is just because they always want to be testing the types of the latest version. But we are only interested in testing our types with the version of TypeScript that we are using for our project. So to work around that, what you can do is you can use the resolutions field in your package manifest, basically to say that the dependency of dtslint with TypeScript should be this version instead of the version that is defined in dtslint's package manifest. Let's go ahead and do that. And I think if we just run yarn, that's probably not going to suffice. Let's just have a look at the diff. No, that has worked. Okay, so you can see it's installing 3.6.4 and it's calling it next, even though that's not strictly true, but that's what we want. So now when we run TSLint, that is actually going to be using our local version of TypeScript. It does say next here, which is something which threw me off for a while. That turns out to be a string that's hard-coded in dtslint in the expect rule. We can have a look quickly. There we go. So what we did just to avoid confusion is just change that string to local, and then it's not as confusing when you read your logs. It's clear that it is using your local version of TypeScript. Okay, so the next thing to think about, that you might want to think about, is tutorial. So currently we've got one tsconfig, one TypeScript project, and that contains our source file and our tests. But the problem is that our tests actually have type errors, and that's expected because we want to test that we get an error when we expect it to. But that means that when we try to compile our project using TSC, it's going to error, and that's not what we want. We only want it to error when we run TSLint and one of our expectations is incorrect. And I can quickly show you that. So let's just do, right, just run TSC, should be enough. So because this is actually an expected error, we don't want TSC to complain about this. So the way we organize this and worked around that problem is by having two TypeScript projects, one that contains your source and one that contains your tests, which then import your source. And so I'll quickly demonstrate that. So let's just say that this will live inside of here, and then we will create a new tsconfig. And you probably want to extend your source config. I think that should be sufficient. Let me just check. So in the source folder now, we don't get an error, and I expect we will get an error. Yep. So when we're compiling our project, we're not going to compile the tests, but we do want to run our tests as part of the build, and we can do that just by using TSLint. To change the project. There we go. Let's just commit what we have so far. Okay, so the final thing that is worth thinking about is if you want some feedback in your development environment, have VS Code is what we're using here. As you can see, oh, there you go, it is actually working. It's telling us inside VS Code that our expectation isn't being met. So you're actually getting feedback about your tests right in front of you, which is really helpful. This is working, and that happened. I ran into an issue where it wasn't working, and I'll quickly talk through that. So the way this works is, of course, this is a TSLint expect rule. We have a extension for VS Code, the TSLint extension installed. There we go. And that just picks up our TSLint config, and it all just works. But there's one thing to think about, and that was if you just install dtslint and you don't install TSLint, then you're not going to get any feedback here. And that's because the VS Code extension expects you to have TSLint installed locally at the root of your node modules. So you have to install it yourself, even though dtslint installs TSLint for you. That isn't sufficient. You need to install your own version. We're really only installing dtslint so we can grab that expect rule file that we saw earlier. This one here. We're not using any of the other things it provides. The dtslint CLI actually runs TSLint internally, and that's why they install TSLint as part of that package. But we're kind of breaking that a little bit. So yeah, that is everything, and that's how you can test your types using dtslint. I hope that's helpful.